Welcome to types of claims to test. So for this portion of the course, we are going to focus on four types of uh, claims that we can test. So our options are we can test claims about one population mean, one population proportion, two population means, and two population proportions. So some key things to look for so that we can determine which type we're working with. First up, are we trying to do an estimation or test a claim? So for the research questions, if we are looking at a what is question, we're looking for a number. What is the average? What is the proportion? Um, then this is an estimation problem. And so that means that we do confidence interval. On the other hand, if we have a yes/no question, then this is testing a claim. And so it's a hypothesis test. So if we know what the research question is, then we immediately know whether we are doing a confidence interval or hypothesis test question. And we will see some example research questions at the end of this video. If it's not worded as a research question, if it's just here's some information, find the confidence interval, the problem will usually say confidence interval. And if it is one of my more generic problem statements for a hypothesis test, it will still end in the research question. So you will know it's a yes/no question, it's a hypothesis test. Next thing we should look at is the problem about the mean, the average, or proportion/percentage. So if it's the mean or the average, the problem will always say this. So for mean or average, one of those two words will be used in the question. For proportion, that is not always the case. So for proportion, or percentage, you may not see the word. So there's another key thing we can use here. Let me give myself some more space. Mean average problems you can only do if you have a quantitative variable. And proportion percentage problems we only do if we are working with a categorical variable. So note, if we are looking at a categorical variable, and that means that we must be looking at proportion. Whereas if we are looking quantitative variable, then we are going to be looking at the mean. Next up is the problem about one population, or are we comparing two populations? So this is just looking through the problem statement or the research question. Are we talking about one population or two populations? So if the research question involves one population, then we are working with one population. Versus if it involves two populations, so if the research question involves two populations, which are being compared, then we are looking at two populations. So here we have a series of 5 research questions. And our job is to simply determine what we are working with. So this first question, do California community college students average more than 20 hours of work a week? So we have the word average. So we know we are talking about the mean. Next thing we want to look at, is this a yes, no question, or is it what is question? This is a yes, no question. So we know that this is a hypothesis test. And then we are simply just asking about a specific one population. We are simply asking about California community college students. So we just have one population. So we are looking at the mean, doing a hypothesis test, and looking at one population. So we might shorthand this as 1 for one population, then mean and test. Next up, again, we have average. What is the average age of first-time California community college students? We have our what is. So we know that this is going to be a confidence interval problem. And then our population, we're looking at first-time California community college students. So we just have one population. We are looking at the average or the mean. And what is tells us that this is a confidence interval. So putting this all together, we are looking at one population, so I'll put a 1. We are talking about the mean, and we are doing a confidence interval, so I'm just going to write interval. Next up, are the majority of California community college students part-time students? So we don't have the word average. We are looking at California community college students. The majority means more than 50%. So this language here simply means are more than 50%. Of California community college students, part-time students. So we are looking at percentage. That is one thing we can use, and that means we are working with proportion. The other way we can tell is we're looking at if they are part-time students. Being part-time student or not, we are looking at a categorical variable. So we can use either of these to tell us that we are working with proportion. We have one population. And then are the majority, are more than 50% of California community college students part-time students? This is a yes/no question, so we are doing a hypothesis test. So putting this all together, we have one population. We are dealing with proportion. I'm going to shorthand that instead of writing the whole word, just prop for proportion. And we are doing a test. Next up, are UC students less likely to work during the school year than California community college students? So again, this is a yes/no question. So we are doing a hypothesis test. This time around, we have UC students, and they are being compared to California community college students. So we have two populations. And we are asking, are they less likely to work? So we were looking at the likelihood to work. We are essentially comparing the percentage that work. So we have the variable would be if they work. So this is a categorical variable. And so that means we are looking at proportion. I'm just going to box the answers since this one's going to be in a different place than the others have been. So for this one, we are dealing with two populations, so I'm going to use a 2. We are talking about proportion, and we are doing a hypothesis test. And then finally, for our last one, do UC students average fewer hours of work a week than California community college students? So again, this is a yes/no question. So we are doing a hypothesis test. We are looking at UC students and California community college students. So we have two populations. And we are talking about the average. So we are working with the mean. So we are looking at two populations, talking about the mean, and running a test. So this is a way to go through the research questions, figure out what we're working with. Again, the mean average questions, you will see the word mean or average in the research question, versus for proportion, the words are often not there. And so we can kind of just go, if it's not mean or average, we're left with proportion. But it is also just if we were working with a categorical variable that it should be proportion.